Right, guys, as I'm sure everyone is aware, 8.1 PTR is up and Feral has received some talent changes. If you follow Feral, this is probably something you're very, very aware of, which we'll be discussing today, but we figured since there's been some Azerite trait tuning, we might as well touch on that. So, the first change, and probably the, well, I don't know, more relevant or less relevant, Iron Jaws damage increased by 66%. And the benefit of having multiple copies of this trait active is reduced. Obviously, that's not particularly clear, but I believe Zan and friends did some tests earlier and have worked out how exactly that's reducing.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, but the basic premise is the second one will add half as much as the first one, and the third one will add basically 1/3 of the value. So if you imagine you have 3 iron your relic, it will basically give you 100% from the first one, and then 66% more from the subsequent two, which means that it's, well, it stacks really poorly, basically, like really poorly. Even if you have one and it's decent now, which we can discuss, I guess, but it will stack really bad. And I'm not sure. It says that the buff doesn't apply to PvP, which might be right, but I don't know if this
If the
diminishing
reduction,
return applies to PvP. It might. So that's something for PvPers to be aware of, I guess.
Yeah,
I never liked that
I don't think
trait
anyone
anyway.
should be running it. Obviously, I really liked the concept of Iron Jaws, but in the end, how they did it ended up rather disappointing. As I'm sure everyone's aware, it's kind of not very good. I think it remains kind of not very good now. Obviously, that's because of a variety of reasons. A, it doesn't provide a whole lot of DPS in itself, and B, the proc mechanic kind of makes it questionable. Obviously, Sabretooth comes into play as well.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue, I think. Like, the trait, and I'm gonna say this, I haven't run any conclusive sims. It's possible that Iron Jaws X1 is decent now in PvE, for single target specifically, but I'm not 100% sure on that yet. But what I will say is, even if it is decent numerically, it completely relies on you having Sabretooth, because you need to cast a lot of bites. It's only a 40% chance when you're casting a 5 combo point bite. And if you think about any other talent build that isn't Sabretooth, and especially now, I mean, after 8.1, maybe this would be different, but certainly now, that means that you will only get, on average, slightly less than 1 per 2 bite.
And you don't
And you
cast a
need
whole
to
lot of
use
bites
it
regardless.
yeah, and you need to use it within quite a short time frame from the proc. I think it's 20 seconds,
Yep.
which means that basically means if you're running a normal build, you probably need to refresh Rip or Savage Roar after you get this proc, right? Because it means you've just bit. And that means that in practice, this trait was really hard to use for non-Sabretooth build. And in Sabretooth, bite is already buffed, which meant that the difference between a maim and a bite was smaller anyway. That was kind of the issue with this trait. But yeah, it might be decent now. It's still gonna have the same issue, which is it's only ever useful with Sabretooth, and that means
Sabretooth
basically a
makes it
single
worse.
time. Yeah. But it might be fine, I don't know. Like I said, we will see.
I think the degree of, or one thing I think is interesting about this is the benefit of having multiple copies of this trait active is reduced. That seems like an interesting philosophical shift. Because it seemed like they wanted people to stack, and now it seems very different. So I wonder which way
it's a
they'll
bit
go.
strange. It's a bit strange. Like obviously, gushing lacerations and blood mist already has this thing, which is that big part of the value is in the first point, and then the second point doesn't. So in a way, I guess you could consider it in that light. Like you don't want traits that just scale super well to scale much better and making blood mist redundant or anything like that. But the problem is our 3 best traits, arguably, well, actually, our 4 best traits: Twisting Claws, Power of the Moon, Wild Flesh Rending, and Raking Ferocity, all scale 100% of the value, right? There's no component like this to stacking them, which will only make them better in my mind. Like, you will only want to stack them more because there's no drawback. And also, many of the general traits have the same thing, where, like, for example, Dagger in the back just scales perfectly the entire way, so it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 2.
It's only really the all-deer traits that lack it due to re-origination array.
But the re-origination rate is so strong that it just overpowers it.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it goes in the future, whether that's going to be a shift maybe later in 8.1 or in the future. But the other Azurite change was obviously Masterful Instincts bonuses increased by 10%. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people listening to this didn't know what Masterful Instincts was, because they haven't even thought about it. But Masterful Instincts gives you Mastery and Armor after Survival Instincts ends. And I'm sure anyone can work out why that's not particularly good.
Yeah, this is a Guardian trait, but it is very well.
It's
You
a
can
Guardian
pick it
trait,
as
but it
Feral,
works
and
for
it does
Feral.
work with Feral. Yeah, and I mean it's even better for Feral in an offensive way because we have a shorter cooldown anyway. But the problem is with this is, well, you surrender your survival cooldown. That's bad enough. That's a good enough reason to not pick this. But if you have it anyway for some reason, I don't know. Maybe it's decent for Guardian now after the change.
I doubt it, but
yeah, I don't know. But maybe you have for some reason. Then, like, it's probably decent now. It probably is decent. I'd imagine, but it's like, yeah, big drawbacks to having. So yeah, just avoid.
It
It's
turns
not
out
gonna
having
be anyway.
defensives is quite good. Ask Windwalkers. Right, so moving on to the meat, I guess, because that sums up all of our Azurite changes. Actually, we wanted to mention Hero Damage's new stacking trait thing, didn't you?
Oh yes. So on Hero Damage, they made some changes to the normal, stack ranking of Azurite traits, where they now will have multiple versions of each trait showing various talent combinations. So for example, some traits, as we know, work a lot better with different talent.
Wild Flesh Rending, for example.
Yeah, Power of the so this will account for that, right? So if you go to that site, you will see, oh well, look at this is like, Wild Flesh Rending, and this is Wild Flesh Rending with certain talents.
And that is indeed pinned in Dreamgroves, so if anyone needs it, it is there. Obviously they have the dungeons as well, which is semi-interesting for anyone looking for what might be good on dungeons, because obviously that can be difficult to sim. There is a semi-decent dungeon profile, which should give you a better idea of what you're looking at.
And I guess we can just very quickly go over this, because I feel like one trait that people are completely ignoring that is actually really good in dungeons is Twisting Claws, Twisted Claws rather, which is a Guardian trait that procs agility for 12 seconds. Basically there's a chance whenever Fresh does damage, and this scales with the number of targets you hit Fresh with. So if you are hitting 5 targets, well, you're pretty likely to get 2.5 stacks, right? And if you hit 10, you're pretty likely to get off.
Caps at 5 is the note to make.
Yeah, and it does stack up, so you don't need to hit them at once. But yeah, this trait is actually really quite good for AoE, and it's obviously not very good on single target at all, but it is something worth keeping in mind, especially if you have some Guardian gear pieces anyway, because it's a decent trait for Guardian as well as first time.
It's definitely worth playing around with.
Yeah.
Cool. That's Hero Damage. That's Azurite. So 8.1 PTR. Right. So obviously,
Feral Changes.
We might as well jump into the Feral Changes. Actually, I changed my mind. Let's be a bit of a tease, and we will leave the talents for a little bit. So obviously, Ferocious Bite is one of the changes. Execute is no longer present. Obviously, I'm sure everyone's aware, when you use Ferocious Bite on a target below 25% health, it refreshes the duration of your rip. So now that will be a behavior that only Sabertooth has.
Yeah, and frankly, without going in too deep on Sabertooth and why it's bad gameplay in my opinion and boring, the same was true for the Execute. Like, it basically made, the rotation less fun below 25%, and it wasn't very strong. It wasn't like we actually got
not going to be a game changer.
No, it wasn't like we got a lot of damage from this. It was like, well, it just got more boring at 25%, and there was not much more to it, like very slight DPS increase. Not a big. I'm
I think
fine
it was
with
a holdover from snapshotting, where it was more interesting.
Yeah, like, and Sabertooth would also be a lot more interesting with snapshotting, obviously. And we are talking about snapshotting of like trinket procs
Yeah.
and stuff like that,
MOP.
because then you could preserve the damage increase from trinkets and stuff, which is why it would be a more interesting design if we had that still. But obviously we don't. The only snapshots now will be static, essentially. Like you do a proper opener and you have BT and TF up on the Rift entire time. Removes all gameplay. Really.
Turns out removing gameplay isn't particularly good.
Hmm.
Another minor change, or well, less minor actually, shred buffed by 20%. That's nice.
Yeah.
It means that we will no longer thrash on single target, which I think reactions to that will be mixed. I'm kind of whatever about it.
Well, you won't thresh on single target unless you have wild flesh run.
Unless you have wild flesh running, of course.
Or well, yeah, we will touch on stats, I guess, but
And to a
unless you have
degree,
very, very large amount
yeah.
of mastery, it could still come back. But it's basically gone for most people.
And to a degree, it will actually make wild flesh running a little worse because obviously this was a change to shred, so it won't scale wild flesh running like an aura change would. And you now have the opportunity cost of casting thresh as opposed to, whereas at the moment it's basically neutral.
Yeah,
Now,
I suppose that's something worth bringing up because I've seen people read this the other way. A 20% buff, or in this case, what right? They adjust the coefficient of shred. That's what happened in the data mining.
Yep.
That means the like the damage from AP goes up, not the damage from traits. So like the wild flesh running damage won't be affected by the 20% at all, which means that that build doesn't actually gain any power. So like Guilty said, it loses very slightly. But
obviously, to go along with that change, they also reduce the damage from stealth to 30% from 50%.
yeah, which offsets.
It should offset it just about.
Although I would say we should say all of this data mining stuff is very uncertain because a lot of the files that were data mined, like basically the PTR client doesn't actually work right now.
Yeah.
So if you go on the PTR client, we just crash. So we haven't been able to try anything in the actual client.
Yeah,
but
disclaimer of data mining is data mining.
And the reason, yes, and I want to specify even more. The reason the client doesn't work is the same reason the data mining is much less reliable than usual, because the data mining, like the files are basically broken from Blizzard side, right? That's why the client doesn't work. And that means that when we are trying to parse them and data mine them, right, we find a lot of errors as well. So all of this is super like uncertain, right? It's worth keeping this in mind.
Yep.
We presume that most of these things are real, but they may not.
Unintentional, yada yada yada. Data mining is data mining, etc.
Yes.
Yeah, so that 1.2% increased shred and 1.3 stealth is a slight buff. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it's worth keeping in mind. Like shred is obviously never used from stealth; it's only ever used from incarnation. So that would make a lot of sense in terms of keeping incarnation roughly equally powerful as it is now. But it's no big deal. Like that's what we would expect anyway with a shred.
Obviously, this will also reduce the value of LI slightly, because LI will essentially take the place of a shred, which will become relevant when we talk about the talent tree more. Mastery. I like this change a lot. Mastery now includes all finishing moves. So to be clear, this doesn't mean it double dips on Rip or Rake or Primal Wrath or anything. You still only get one mastery bonus.
And it also doesn't, to our knowledge at least, affect Savage Rock. Although we haven't been able to test that, so I guess we don't know for sure. But presumably
we can talk about
it
that talent tree as well, because I think it should.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that'll be nice. Obviously, that'll increase the value of Sabertooth slightly. It also means that Mastery, looking at my breakdowns at least, it will affect about 20% extra of my damage. So it will be about 20% or so better.
Also helps the Iron Jaws trait.
It helps the Iron Jaws trait, indeed. So that'll be nice. As I said, big fan of this change. I think it's
it will make Mastery better. It's unlikely to make Mastery your best stat or anything, but it will make it a lot better than it has been. Like worst case, it was like half the value of haste. They should make it more like. Because the haste would probably go down in value.
Haste will go down slightly as well.
It would probably be much more even anyway.
I think that this will be assuming this is just it, I think this will be the most balanced our stats have been basically ever.
Yeah, I agree.
Because obviously they've addressed a lot of the problems now with.
Well, ignoring Rune of Reorigination.
Ignoring Rune of that's fair. Yeah, ignoring Rune of Reorigination when all of your stats were exactly equal, apart from Mastery, which was 1 point better than. Yeah. Outside of that, I think this will be the most balanced baseline our stats have been for a long time, which is really nice. It will probably basically mean that outside of Trinkets and Azurite, eye level is an upgrade, which is
Yes.
nice.
Yeah. I'd imagine rings and stuff you'd still probably want to
Rings are
avoid
probably
first,
still
probably.
dodgy, yeah.
But it would be much more even, which is nice.
Yeah. Maim was buffed as well, slightly.
Yep.
Energy cost reduced and damage buffed.
Buffs Iron Yost.
Yep, buffs Iron Jaws. Obviously, because now Maim is slightly less valuable.
I'd imagine this is mostly for PvP, but I don't know.
Yeah, it would be a weird one for PvP, because obviously you typically aren't using Maim for damage. But
it seems strange in PvE though, because it's such an insignificant amount.
Yeah.
I don't understand. This might just be a data mining error, to be honest.
Obviously, yeah. Disclaimer again. Obviously, 25% bonus to our haste is gonzo. We all knew this was coming. We talked about it in our previous episode of Emergency Cat Chat. But this was something they wanted to do.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Like that was just basically a relic.
Oversight. Yeah, I mean, nobody should be surprised about this. Haste is still going to be a good stat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's probably even. It's gonna be best or second best, almost certainly, unless you stack too much.
This won't break all your gear. This won't. Yeah, nothing to worry about here. This is it rebalances our stats. Rip energy cost reduction. The interesting thing about this is that with Soul of the Forest now, Rip will be energy positive.
Oh yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
And then obviously the bigger Rip change is Rip's duration now scales with combo point rather than the damage. So I've seen a lot of like misunderstandings about this. So basically how Rip works now is it will always last the same duration, but it will do less damage per tick. How it will change is it will always do the same damage per tick, but now the duration will change.
Yeah. So it means that in terms of the DPS would be the same regardless of any combo points you use, but the
energy efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. How much you get per energy would be a lot higher tag combo point. Now, because of how cheap this is, the energy efficiency isn't a big deal either way. But it will be another reason we'll get to why you want to still use this at 5 combo point a lot.
Yeah. Though there is always the potential for some micro optimizations around 4 combo points.
Oh yeah.
Which will be interesting to see. And obviously this will be nice for like priority targets where you've got 1 combo point and there'll be a lot less of having to pool 5 combo points for an ad basically, especially if the ad's going to die quickly. Pop on a small Rip and fire away, which will be nice for a lot of fights, I think. It's basically Rupture if anyone plays Rogue.
Yeah, it is very much like Rupture. I've seen some people put, well, like it is similar to Rupture and it's also similar to Nightblade, right?
Yeah.
But the big reason this matters. So for example, if you have an ad that lives for 6 seconds, currently you would say, well, you bite that. But with this change, you will be able to do like 2 combo point rip or something like that, which it's just going to be a lot more convenient for stuff like that. And it also means like if you fuck up, right? So if your rip drops, you can reapply a short rip.
Yeah, that's the other one. Or if you're a clown monkey idiot and you misclick rip at like 4 combo points or something.
Which yeah, it's not the end of the world.
Definitely haven't done before.
That was really bad before. It was essentially like 20% loss damage. If you replaced it, well, yeah, it might be an increase to replace it, but you would have lost a lot of damage.
Momentary shout out, but you know who's going to be pleased by this change? Moon Bunny. because now he's not going to have to change his weak auras as much.
That's right. Yeah, the combo point aspect of weak aura, that's true for me as well, was really, really ugly.
Yeah. So yeah, shout out to Moonbunny and his weak auras. Right. I think we've covered all of the baseline changes, so we've just got talents to go, which is the interesting part.
Yes.
So, which row do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about the big row or the minor row?
We'll start with the level 100, where nothing has changed. And why is this relevant? Well, this is relevant because there was a lot of talk about blood talents when the first hint at 8.1 changes were released with when we got the energy tweaks a while back. But nothing seemed to have happened here.
Yeah.
And I mean, I suppose it's relevant to say there is, like what I was touching on earlier, has to do with blood talents, which is a lower CP rip, right? It will have not 100% chance of getting a predator swiftness pro.
Obviously, yes,
So
it's 20% per combo point.
Yeah, so if you have blood talent, it is very likely that you will still mostly cast 4 and 5 combo points finishers in almost every circle.
Yeah, obviously at the time they just talked about how that was something they were looking at. Obviously there could be more coming. There could be something on data mined, who knows? But based on this, it seems like they've looked at it and they've decided that they're happy with blood talents. But obviously that could change going forward. So
yep,
there's a bit of a question mark there. Anything else on that row? Mock change?
I mean, Mock gets better with red buff, I suppose.
Yeah.
It gets worse with mastery change. I think it will largely be ±0 versus blood talents. Like maybe it's very slightly better, but in practice I think it would be
touching
same,
slightly on the level 90 row. There is of course the semi-interesting gameplay of Mock and Brutal Slash on single target.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Like that will help Mock a bit, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't think it will.
I don't think it will make it better, but it's semi-interesting gameplay at least.
Yeah, it's more interesting than just
the
using threat
Mock,
for sure.
Well,
right. I suppose we're at level 90 row then.
I guess we're at the level 90 row, the interesting row. Right, so let's talk about what's been removed from this row. Sabretooth is no longer on this row. Unfortunately, Sabretooth is still in the game.
And Savage Roar is also gone from this row.
Savage Roar has gone from this row, and Savage Roar is still in the game. So that leaves 2 empty talents and 2 talents that are going from elsewhere.
So I'll start with the most exciting one, and you will take the less exciting one. Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
So we got scent of blood back. This is the artifact trait that almost every one of you probably forgot about. But it used to reduce the cost of swipe after you cast the trash. Back in Legion, it was like buy 2 and for 3 seconds. Now it's like buy 3, at least in this build, and for 6 seconds. So that's a lot better, obviously, as well. Well, that's good for AoE now, isn't it?
Doesn't seem bad. But obviously we have the other new talent, which will henceforth be referred to as that OP AoE rip thing, which should describe what the talent does, but it's actually called Primal Wrath. That will deal instant damage and apply rip to all enemies within 10 yards, which will obviously last longer per combo point. And I believe it does more damage per combo point as well. So it has an instant damage component.
Yeah, the instant damage increases with combo points.
Will scale. Obviously the rip, as per normal rip, will scale with combo points on duration. Obviously we talked in, was it the last episode? Emergency chat about combo points and AoE finishers. And I think this addresses a lot of the problems that we both had with AoE finishers, in that because it applies rip, which is already part of our single target rotation, and it applies a slightly worse rip, to be clear, it applies a half duration rip. Because it applies rip, it will never fade into single target.
Yep.
Which is nice. That was a lot of my problems with AoE finishers. And this addresses that.
Additionally, it will likely never be useless. because it's very hard to tune this in a way where it's bad without also tuning rip,
Yeah.
which is a very important part of a single target rotation.
Yeah, so this does kind of address both of the problems, obviously, because if I remember correctly, my quote was AoE finishers are either useless or they're used on single targets. So this won't be useless and can't be useless because it turns out Rip kind of needs to be an okay ability, and it also won't be
Yeah, at a
used on single
minimum,
target.
yeah, at a minimum, it needs to be better than Ferocious Bite, which means that this will always do more damage than AoE Ferocious Bite would do. So that's
Uh,
why I've kept.
yeah, well, half.
Hmm?
Half fresh biopsy because half duration.
Oh yeah.
Um, but I think this is probably OP as fuck, by the way. I think this is really, really good. From the numbers, it's something like Primal Wrath over the same duration as Bladestorm's cooldown does the same, if not more, depending on stats, AP coefficient as Bladestorm, which is enormous.
Yeah. It's worth saying, I think Rip was nerfed very slightly as well in this build, which does slightly offset how insane this would be versus live. Again, data mining, but I think it was reduced by like 10% or something along those lines. Anyway, this is really good. Like this 12 seconds is not very long either. Like this is fast enough that if you have 5 combo points on the start of a pack, even a rather bursty pack, will realistically live for majority of these things. Just flat out.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, it's not hugely common that packs die in less than 12 seconds on relevant
Yeah,
content.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it basically never happens. Like,
yeah, and yeah, obviously it will scale with
really
single
well.
target. It will scale really well. Um,
Haste and mastery.
haste and mastery, and crit and verse. It'll scale with everything. One thing that I think is reasonably relevant is gushing lacerations, the rip trait, which will increase rip damage and also gives you 6% chance per tick to get a combo point.
Yeah, it obviously scales really well with it.
Yeah, enormously so. I believe you worked out, and it was what 11 targets, and this ability basically becomes free.
Yeah.
Turns out that's reasonably good. So I'm
Yeah,
interested in seeing where this goes, but this seems really fucking strong.
It's also nice. I do feel like it fits into the Feral toolkit a lot.
I
Like
agree,
this
yeah.
is still very blade oriented, and unlike other like AOE type stuff, it's cool.
Yeah, we talked a lot in
Also,
the past
it's
about
worth.
AoE and combo points on AoE.
Yeah, I mean, there has been some people critiquing this, saying that, for example, this doesn't solve burst AoE. That is true. Although I would say that I don't think burst AoE is a real issue we have. Like, it is true in the sense of, yes, on a short M plus pack, we never had a lot of burst AoE, but a short M plus pack is still more than 12 seconds almost always. So like this will do a lot of damage in M plus. Like I think this is actually really good for M plus. This talent.
Yeah,
specifically.
I agree. I think this solves a lot of problems. To touch on what you just said regarding burst AoE and how we don't think it was a problem originally, I think that the reason why people might have viewed burst AoE as a problem is because previously you sacrificed a significant amount of single target in order to take Brutal Slash, which was our burst AoE. That's not really a thing anymore because we now have a AoE specific row, um, which means that we can always take an AoE talent. So you are sacrificing 0 single target to take Brutal Slash for burst AoE if that's what you need.
And I suppose we should say that like if we said that SR and Sabretooth were gone, and obviously that means Brutal Slash is the third option on this round.
Yeah.
It's in the same spot technically, but yeah.
So Brutal Slash remains, and interestingly enough, because Scent of Blood only has a tangential single target gain on certain fights, Primal Wrath probably won't ever have a single target gain.
Yeah, no, it should never be useful. Like Rip should always be better.
That does mean
On one
that
target.
Brutal Slash will likely become the choice for single target. Only marginally so, because if I recall correctly, with a Shred buff, Shred's AP coefficient goes to like 54% or something.
No, well, yeah. If
with a bleed on the
bonus,
target,
yeah.
yeah. it was 37, 1.2,
I
1.2.
think I think it's
So it should be
43.
54, 55 or in that range.
Yeah.
And Brutal Slash is 60%. So and Brutal Slash is obviously cheaper. Um, so it's only marginally better on single target. But I do think Brutal Slash on single target is good gameplay. I enjoy Brutal Slash on single target.
Yeah, I never hate. I that was like the best part about 7.3 Feral for me. Honestly, like most of the other things I didn't like running mock, I didn't particularly like. Savage Roar in that build was super boring, etc. But the new, like I like Brutal Slash, and I like being able to have Brutal Slash on encounters where you want some AoE, but you also want a single attack, and that is back essentially. Like you will always have it, so you will always have some AoE. Uh, like you will always have access to decent AoE now,
Yeah,
even on a fight like Sekos where you might want single target talents. Like you will still have access to AoE, which is a big difference, and it's actually really good.
yeah. I think everyone's been looking at how good Primal Wrath is, or whether Primal Wrath is good. And I don't think people have fully appreciated how good it is to have an AoE focused row. Um, so yeah, really big fan. Thanks Blizzard.
Yeah, this is something we talked about like even before BFA
Yes,
in like
yeah,
like this is a really good thing. Like like you want your A, and I've seen people like why can't we pick multiple AoE talent? Because well, A you can, B you can't pick both Brutal Slash and Primal Rough because then you would have the same issue we have now, which is you have to pick both to do high, like or AoE would be balanced around having both, which means that you would lose a tremendous amount of single target every time you had AoE talent. This is like the big issue we have in M plus or in raids with AoE. It's not the numbers itself. Like if you full AoE build and you just look at add damage, like yeah, we are not kings of AoE, but we are fine. Like we're middle of the road. The problem was everyone has almost still maintained single target, whereas we didn't. And I'm not saying it's literally just us, right? But the other classes that you think are garbage, right, had the same issue. This resolves it for us at least. You know, that's one step on the.
yeah. Can't stress enough how much I am a fan of this. So yeah, so I guess we'll move on to the next row, which has a dearly beloved that we shall miss, and also an old friend, I guess. So next row would be, I can't remember what number it is, but that would be the Incarnation, Soul of the Forest, and now Savage Raw row.
Never
Which
seen this row before.
I've never
Very
seen.
interesting
Yeah.
configuration.
Hello, 7.0, is that you? Um, yeah. So Jagged Wounds was here before. Jagged Wounds is gone now. Um, he shall be missed. But yeah,
I suppose we should say it's likely. There's a
yes.
little bit of hope for people that love Jagged Wound.
Yeah.
We
There's always hope in data mining, friends. But yeah. So Savage Roar is here now. This is basically the same row as it was in 7.0. It's a little bit of an odd row, obviously, because Soul of the Forest has energy component. Incarnation has an energy component, a little more indirect. And then Savage Roar kind of does the opposite of the two.
But there's another change to Savage Roar,
Aha.
which means that Savage Roar will now, instead of giving you 15% damage for its duration, it will give you 10% damage and 10% energy radiant.
Yeah.
That change basically makes it so that, well, over its duration, Savage Roar is energy positive. It will not, unlike Soul of the Forest, it won't give you it back at 1, but it will give you, a higher base rate, essentially. And yeah, it's I don't know if it's better or worse numerically. It's gonna depend. I'd imagine it's fairly similar. Maybe it's slightly worse, but it's similar.
I mean, one thing that kind of semi amuses me here is the people who like a faster paced feral will end up with Savage Roar being the best choice here to make the spec faster paced, which does tickle me a little
Probably.
bit.
Although
But
I would say it's similar to Soul, I guess.
yeah,
It's probably not gonna feel that different. Uh, I'd imagine, right? We don't know, but I'd imagine that this would be tuned to be the best talent sustain in this role for most things, but it remains to be seen.
yeah. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, yeah, I don't mind the change. One
Yeah,
thing.
Yes.
Yeah, far away. Because I was about to take on a
No, but
tangent.
like we said before, if the stealth bonus from Incarnation is nerfed, this doesn't affect how good Incarnation is, but it does affect how good Wild Flesh Rending works with Incarnation,
Yeah.
because that would be modified by it. So that
Yeah,
this
because Wild
means that
Flesh Rending
Wild
is
Flesh Rending,
modified by Incarnation, yeah.
yeah. So this means that likely that combination, Wild Flesh Rending and Incarnation, which people are already overrating in my opinion, but is viable right now, will be considerably worse. So that's something to keep.
Yeah. Right. I guess I want to touch on Mastery on Savage Raw. Uh, I think, obviously, this might have happened. Data mining, we don't know. Um, but I hope slash think that Savage Raw should scale with Mastery. I've discussed this in Dream Road, but obviously the main reason is both the other talents on its row scale with Mastery. Obviously, Soul of the Forest due to the increased finishing moves damage and the increased energy, meaning that you get more finishing moves. And Incarnation for the same reason, obviously increased rake damage, Mastery scaling, and then you get increased finishes through higher crit chance on Shred slash a longer duration of reduced energy costs. But Savage Raw takes away from the number of finishes you cast, because even though it's energy positive, or I guess less so if it's energy positive, um, you will Savage Raw replaces a finisher.
It's energy positive, but still combo point negative.
Yes, Savage Raw replaces a finisher. So as you get more mastery, it will become relatively worse. So I think that either the damage or the energy regeneration rate should probably scale with mastery in order to keep this basically relevant as gear goes on.
Yep, agreed. That's pretty simple.
Yeah, basically. So I'll be interested to see how that
And to
turns
be
out.
fair, we haven't been able to test, so maybe it does.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't believe it does, but we don't know.
obviously that would be basically the same behavior as Slice and Dice was in Rogues for Rogues in Warlords of Draenor. Um,
For sub
for
specifically.
sub specifically, yeah. And as a note, make sure it's dynamic so that you don't have to use pre-full gear sets, Blizzard. If you do make it affect mastery, make it dynamic, because that was questionable. Who else remembers their rogues pulling in? What was it?
Was it tier 5? I
It
don't
was
remember.
tier 5 and the Throne of Thunder set,
Mm.
and then like a mastery offhand or something, like mastery on you. Basically, they were just not a class if you pre-pulled. They really didn't like boomkins. Right. So next few rows, moving on, no changes. Utility, 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 going down to level 15. I know this one. Um, so
The only
Sabretooth moves on to this row.
Yeah, this is the only thing we know for sure before PTR client comes up. Like we know Sabretooth has moved to this row. What we don't know, and I know a lot of people speculated here, is which of the talents are gone. We presume the Lunar Inspiration survives, because why would it be deleted, right? It fills its niche on single target just fine. And I, at least, presume that Blood Scent is gone, but some people believe Predator is gone, right? And the reason I think Blood Scent is gone is mostly because the name Scent of Blood from the previous row and Blood Scent, that is a bit too much of a similarity, plus the fact that Blood Scent was already a very boring talent without a niche, really. It was just free crit. So it seems likely that Sabretooth replaces the other boring talent that didn't do much, right? So it's likely that Predator is still around and has just moved to the leftmost position in the tree. But we don't know 100% certainty before the PTR is actually playable.
Yeah,
And similarly, in theory, right, it could be Jagged Wounds that is the leftmost on this row. I don't believe that, but it theoretically could.
yeah. So obviously we just take the assumption that we can just miss out a talent here. Lunar Inspiration versus Sabretooth. I do think this is a bit of an odd row because those two talents kind of feel like they do the same thing.
Yes.
Sabretooth has single target value, and obviously it has cleave value because you can maintain more rips more easily. Lunar Inspiration, another dot for
Al-
cleave,
although with Primal Wrath,
although with Primal Wrath, yeah.
yeah,
So
I don't know how big that niche would be from Sabertooth, but yeah,
so it's a bit of an odd. It is a bit of an odd row. Um,
it is.
at the moment on live, I think people vastly overrate Sabertooth and vastly underrate Li because if you look at the two talents individually, they're basically equal. In fact, I think Li might be a tiny bit better than Sabertooth. Obviously, this depends on the Azurite trait you're using, but
Oh,
yeah. So I think
we
this is a fairly even row.
yeah, presumably with the changes, Sabertooth with current tuning would be very slightly better than
Yes,
Li.
obviously mastery changes make Sabertooth better, shred changes make Li slightly worse, so it probably flips it around.
But it's still gonna be very even. So, and obviously this is subject to tuning as well.
Yeah, obviously this is a first draft. They can't even make the damn thing work at the moment, so who knows what else they're doing.
And Predator, if we are assuming Predator stay, that is, well, it's gonna be a very similar situation to before. Basically, you're gonna have the choice between two mostly single target oriented talent and one that is gonna be using most AoE content. But it's not like it's a massive. You
Yeah.
do get the extra TF duration, right, which is fine for single target. It doesn't do zero DPS. I mean, it's a DPS loss, Predator and single target, but it has always been kind of fun.
Yeah, so this will be the interesting row. We'll see how that ends up. So
And if it is, and I would say, just to go through the other circumstances, we have already seen that Jagged Wounds once was balanced versus Sabertooth, so it could be on this row. Like, I feel like that wouldn't really change our opinions on this row.
no, it
Would
would still
like,
be a little bit weird.
and if it is Blood Scent, I mean, Blood Scent was balanced versus Li, so it will also be balanced versus Sabertooth. But it seems really weird and really quite a boring row when you pick between two boring passives and one active. Plus, I think we would miss Predator a bit on
Yeah.
NM Plus. So
Yeah. Do you want to take a moment to talk about how much we hate Sabertooth?
yes,
Sabertooth is even worse now. It's even more boring, right? Because before, Sabertooth made your rotation boring for 75% of the boss fight. Now it makes your rotation boring for 100% of the boss fight.
there you go. Plus, you could use Li with it, which meant that you had one more thing to do. Now that's gone as well, and Trash is gone. I mean, so like just quickly, Trash and Single Target being dead or presumably dead. You get Brutal Slash, right? So that basically just slots in, essentially replaces Thrash. So it's
It's
not
probably
like,
more interesting than Thrash, to be fair.
I agree, it probably is as well. But that means you have plus minus buttons and complexity. But with Li is potentially gone when you're running Sabertooth. So yeah, that definitely removes a button when you're running Sabertooth.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same deal as. In fact, it's probably even worse, yeah, because before
It
you
makes
had
the
Li
opener
and
worse as well.
Sabertooth, yeah, it makes the opener a lot worse. But before, if you had Sabertooth, at least you had Li and you had Rake, so you had two dots essentially. Now, if you have Sabertooth, you have one dot. You have Rake. Yeah.
It is a bit interesting how Sabertooth. I just realized with the opener thing that actually it depends how Sabertooth works with the reduced duration rip, right? Because potentially you could do
Yeah, that's
a
something to discuss.
2 combo rip.
Yeah, that would
I
be
really hope
interesting.
that's not a thing. But yeah, we will have to find out how that works before we can say anything about it. But potentially that could be some
I mean,
weird
even without
interaction.
Sabertooth, I can see 2 combo point rip potentially being a thing.
Oh, it probably
Yeah.
is because you will get snapshots.
I mean, even if you play Li, you probably Rake Li. Yeah.
Yeah, with
Well,
Li it seems now probably, but without the Li it will definitely be interesting.
yeah. So that will be interesting to look at. But basically, Sabertooth still sucks and we hate it.
It's boring. Like I know some people don't mind it. I've seen that opinion. That's perfectly fine. But the problem is essentially it removes rip, right? You still press rip once in a fight, and that's really quite boring. and then you just press one finisher, right? It removes all finisher game.
Yeah,
It
talent
makes
should really
Rake
add
and
something
Blood
rather than
Talents
take
really.
it away.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same problem with absolute corruption, really. There's probably
There's
other
a
talents
lot
to
of
do it.
these.
Yeah.
Well, there aren't a lot. That's why it's egregious, right? Most talents do not remove things from rotation. They might be completely passive, but it is rare that they actually actively simplify the rotation. Yeah, I'm not a fan of this talent. I don't see what it's supposed to be the niche it has in this row either. It seems like it's just a choice because you want to not cast Rip
Yeah.
for some reason.
I would like to see, if we're talking about practical or theory, I'd like to see either tier 19, set bonus, go here, or Jagged Wounds. Because I think Jagged Wounds actually would be an interesting choice against Predator with Primal Wrath existing.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot more they could do to this row than just put Sabretooth there. I'm not going to complain because the rest of the changes are really good. I'm a big fan, but this is one of the less exciting changes.
Yeah. The two I mean, if you sum it up, right? This is the first iteration.
Yes.
Almost certainly there will be a second iteration at least. We don't know how many, but there will probably be at least one more iteration after they get to, see us play it on the PTR. So I just want a public service announcement. If you like or hate these changes, go on the PTR and test them.
Give your feedback.
Yeah, give good data to Blizzard as well.
And feedback forums probably better than feedback in Discord.
Yes, for sure. I mean, it's just impossible to read everything on the Discord, even if you want to. Like I read a lot of Dream Grow, for example, but even I'll miss, a lot going on.
There were the
so
days
much.
when every morning I would go back and read the whole history since I'd gone to bed. Literally not possible to do that anymore, guys. Ever.
And that's obviously true for Blizzard as well. Even if they are reading feedback from many sources, right, and they probably are reading feedback from Discord, it's very hard to do in a way where you get everything. Whereas on the forums, it's much easier, just because everything is stored, easy to read.
If you're going to complain, please make it constructive. Don't make it, I hate this because it sucks. Make it, I don't hate this because this sucks in particular.
Yeah, it's fine to say you don't like how something feels, for example. That's valuable feedback. Just don't be very obnoxious and angry about it.
Yeah, right. One thing we didn't touch on, which I want to touch on, is Scent of Blood's tangential single target value. I mentioned it briefly, but basically, there is the possibility that this talent lets you roleplay as a rogue, say, as a sub-rogue specifically, on like Zul or something. Obviously, it's 3/6 seconds. So at 10 targets, that makes swipe free. Obviously, you need to cast Thrash, so it's not completely free.
It doesn't, yeah, exactly.
But that does mean that you will essentially you'd be able to use this talent to pump single target into something with Ferocious Bite.
Yeah, you will basically just get, like, it would be like you Thrash, you then spam swipes up to 5 CP or
bite.
4, we'll see, and then you bite. And that's what you do.
Rinse and repeat.
And because of how well it would be free to swipe, essentially, is a much cheaper builder than Shredwood.
Yeah. Which is obviously interesting because Brutal Slash would normally be the only single target choice here, but there is a niche scenario where Scent of Blood could potentially be better single target than Brutal Slash. So I've seen a lot of worry about how this basically just pigeonholes us into Brutal Slash single target, but I don't think it does.
No, there's many fights with some AoE.
Yeah.
And, like, I think in most cases you will run Brutal Slash. It's a safer default option. But I think there will definitely be niche cases where this is good. And similarly, if you're in a tyrannical dungeon when there's a lot of mobs with the boss, for example, I mean, this might be pretty rare right now, but you could imagine the situation where you have some
There's almost certainly going to be more dungeons, so there's the possibility.
Yeah, where you have pulled to the boss, but you want boss DPS. Like, Scent of Blood might be the better choice than PW in that situation. Just because even if PW would do more raw damage, you might want this damage to be single target focus. And also, Scent of Blood isn't 0 AoE. It's actually not crazy far behind the other options on AoE.
Yeah, obviously. What is it? Swipe is like a bit less than half a Brutal Slash?
Yeah, roughly.
So
That's fine.
it doesn't seem particularly difficult for Scent of Blood to beat out Brutal Slash.
Yeah, you just need to end up with twice as many swipes per cooldown and Brutus Slash. That means you need in what is the cooldown right around 6 seconds, or a recharge rather.
8,
You need to do
isn't it?
more than two. Yeah, well, with realistic
Yeah.
numbers of haste. Right?
Well, haste will affect. Oh no, haste. Yeah,
Well,
haste
it's
won't affect
essentially
both because it'll be
no, not
free.
really. Yeah,
Um,
but it
but yeah,
means that swipe with realistically, you need to do more than 2 per 6 seconds reliably to beat Brutus Slash and
which
AOE.
doesn't seem particularly difficult.
No, it seems very likely that you might end up there.
Um, probably a little bit more because multi-rake, but yeah.
And obviously, Brutus Slash is staggered burst as well, so it is
Yeah,
burst, yeah, for sure. But
and burst has its own value. But yeah, this I actually think there's, as much as I don't think there's often choice in talent rows, there's always going to be a best talent. I think there are several scenarios which could change what is the best talent in this row, which is almost choice. Almost choice is better than not choice.
oh yeah,
Um, yeah.
and
So
obviously, the big thing is it makes us better just when, like, we're still bringing our full single targets for most AoE situations. It's cool, like, that's a good chain. Very, very good.
yeah, not sacrificing something to be good in AoE is really, really nice. Right. Is there anything else to discuss here?
I think
I
this is
think
most.
we've pretty much covered everything until they potentially make more changes. Or don't make more changes.
Yeah, like, I guess if, like, our summary, right, is we're pretty happy with the changes. I think they're mostly in the right. Uh, I am happy that they are addressing issues. Well, I guess we can go through what is like outstanding issues that they haven't really fixed with this.
Sabretooth.
Yeah, so
Sabretooth and Berserk, I think, are the two big ones.
for sure. I guess Fair
Um,
Friends. To
Feral
some,
Frenzy, yeah, being, yeah, I think tier 100 being mostly the Blood Talons show could probably look at. I think I still hate Sabretooth, as we've already discussed, so I'm not going to harp on about that. And I think Berserk is a god awful cooldown. To be
yeah,
fair, that semi gets addressed by making Incarnation easier to take to a degree.
for sure. And Shred doing more damage as well, and set.
Yeah.
Like
And
Berserk is
Ferocious
better
Bite
than
doing
it
more
was.
damage. Yeah, so they've buffed Berserk slightly, but
It's still gonna be pretty disappointing for a 3 minute cooldown. There's the issue that 3 minute cooldowns are pretty bad in general. Like Fetid, for example,
yep.
it's really bad. Uh, that's still not addressed. I think that's one of the biggest things we're gonna have still to complain about, because that is it's a boring cooldown that isn't very good and on a really awkward cool.
You're really
But
selling it
it's a
to me.
minor deal. It's a minor deal, I think, compared to the rest of the kit. But it is definitely something that could
Yeah,
be.
I think at this point I'm niggling to a degree. I would like to see Berserk do something more. I think I made it reasonably public before that I don't like cooldowns that make me do the same thing.
Yeah, I think there's an argument. Maybe it should just be removed. Like maybe just Berserk should be removed and some power be transferred to TF, right? And just have us be a sustained class as our need.
Yeah,
Uh,
it feels bad to have Berserk. As much as I would like to maintain a cooldown, it feels bad to have Berserk and have it be awful. Probably worse than to not have a cooldown at all. Yeah, I think I got myself there. I think that made
that's
sense.
yeah, that's I think that's the big thing. So what I wanted to say with the level 100 row, well, Mock may be slightly less bad with Brutal Slash and stuff being baseline. It is still not for me. I still don't like it, mostly because how it competes with Blood Talents, which I think, like for me, Blood Talents is super integral to the rotation and how it feels, and in fact, how Feral played. I know some people
Yeah,
really hate it for various reasons, um, but I do think it's very good, like very very good part of the gameplay. And the problem is, like almost anything you put on this row is going to be in that awkward position where, well, it suffers from while you don't have BT, and that's a bit of a shame.
yeah.
But I'm not sure there's much to do about. Mock, I think, will survive these changes just fine. It would probably be slightly closer. So, if you are one of those people who really like Mock, that's maybe good for you.
Who hurt you?
Feral Frenzy still has the exact same issue it has had, which is that it is basically that it is useless on like priority target swap. The problem is if it isn't exactly 45 seconds or 90 seconds, you want that priority swap. It is basically useless. That's the biggest issue with it because you will lose too much single target. You already lose quite a bit, but you will lose versus BT. But that's a minor tuning issue. But the big issue is if you don't use it on cooldown, you lose a lot more. And so you cannot really save it for an ad that doesn't line up very well with it. And I mean, Sekvos is a current tier example where this is really apparent, right? You would ideally want to have it on those ads, for example, but you can't ever use it but like that because it just lines up really poorly. So it just never be a reasonable choice. And both Mock and BT are better on that type of priority swap, and that just means this doesn't have a niche really. A wish list, right, would be that it had 2 charges. I
That
think
would be
that would
really nice.
have a lot of issues. I
Yeah.
think that would make a lot. You could then chain it in one TF if you want a lot of burst at one point, or you can, just space it out a bit without losing much single target power.
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything on AoE either, obviously, but that's,
That's a separate issue. But is
that's
of
fine.
course.
Maybe it doesn't need.
Yeah. Right. I think we've covered pretty much everything. So that'll be us for now. As they make more PTR changes, we'll probably try and do this a bit more frequently than a month for a period to make sure we're keeping up to date with things. But we'll see about that. So if you made it this far, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you're looking forward to 8.1 as much as we both are, I assume.